Story 1. The Babysitter. She checked on the kids one last time before bed. They were fine. It was the thing standing behind her in the hallway mirror that wasn't. Sarah had babysat the Kessler twins a dozen times before. Same routine: dinner, cartoons, bedtime by 9. Around 10 p.m., she went upstairs to check on them one last time. Both boys were asleep, tucked in exactly how she'd left them. She paused in the hallway to fix her hair in the antique mirror outside their room. That's when she noticed it. In the reflection, both bedroom doors were open. She turned around. Both doors were closed. She told herself she was tired. She went back downstairs. At 11:40 p.m., the landline rang. It was Mrs. Kessler checking in from the restaurant. "Everything's fine," Sarah said. "The boys are asleep upstairs." There was a long silence on the line. Then, Mrs. Kessler's voice, very quiet. "Sarah, we don't have boys. We have a daughter. She's staying at my mother's tonight. There's no one else in that house." Sarah didn't hang up the phone. She didn't move. Because upstairs she could hear 2 sets of small feet walking slowly down the hallway toward the stairs. The police found the house empty. No sign of forced entry. No sign anyone else had ever been there that night, except 2 small, wet footprints leading from the hallway mirror to the front door and stopping there, as if whatever made them had simply walked through it. Sarah quit babysitting after that. She still won't say what she saw in the mirror before she ran. Story 2. Night Shift. The hospital morgue has 30 drawers. He counted them every night. That night, there were 31. Marcus worked the graveyard shift as a hospital security guard, and the morgue was on his rounds. Nothing ever happened down there. It was cold, quiet, and utterly still, which is exactly why he liked it. One night, doing his 2 a.m. walk-through, he counted the drawers out of habit, like he did every shift. 30. Always 30. That night, he counted 31. He stood there a long moment, telling himself he'd miscounted. He counted again. 31 drawers, in a room built for exactly 30. The extra one was at the end of the row, slightly out of alignment with the others, like it had been pushed in from a different angle. There was no chart for it, no paperwork. When he checked the logbook, every drawer was accounted for. Every drawer except the one that shouldn't exist. He should have left. Instead, he opened it. It was empty, but it was warm. Every other drawer in that room was refrigerated, freezing to the touch. That one was warm, like something had been resting inside it minutes before. He radioed his supervisor, who came down immediately. By the time she arrived, there were only 30 drawers again. She checked the room herself and found nothing unusual. Marcus finished his contract but never took another night shift. He says he still dreams about it sometimes. Not the empty drawer, but the sound he heard right after he closed it. Something breathing from somewhere very close behind him. Story 3. The room that wasn't there. They'd lived in the house 11 years before they found the door behind the bookshelf. It had no doorknob on their side. The Halversons bought their Victorian home as a fixer-upper and slowly renovated it over a decade. During a kitchen remodel, a contractor mentioned the wall behind the study's built-in bookshelf sounded hollow. They pulled the shelf away and found a door. Old, wooden, painted over so many times it had nearly fused shut. There was no knob on their side, just a flat panel like it was meant to be opened only from the other direction. They pried it open. Behind it was a room, maybe 8 feet by 6, with no windows. A child's rocking chair sat in the corner, rotted with age. Scratched into the wall, over and over, in different handwriting styles, were the words, "Don't let her in." The house had been built in 1901. Public records showed a family had lived there with 3 children, until 1911, when only 2 were recorded in the next census. No explanation, no obituary. The middle child, a girl, simply stopped appearing in any record after that year. The Halversons sealed the room back up. They didn't board it. They bricked it, floor to ceiling, and replastered over it entirely. They say the house has been quiet ever since, mostly, except some nights their youngest daughter says a girl visits her room and asks to be let out. They've stopped asking her to explain what she means. Story 4. What followed us home? We counted 4 sets of footprints walking beside us on that trail. There were only 3 of us. 3 friends went camping in a stretch of national forest known for its isolation. No cell service for miles, which was exactly the appeal. On the second night, they heard something moving just beyond the firelight. Heavy steps, deliberate. Circling the camp slowly, they assumed it was a bear and secured their food. The steps continued anyway, all night. Never approaching, never leaving. The next morning, hiking back toward the trailhead, one of them glanced down at the muddy path and stopped walking. 4 sets of footprints ran parallel to theirs, 3 human, and a 4th, barefoot, with elongated toes, matching their pace exactly the entire way back to the car. They never saw what made them. But that night, back home, one of the 3 woke to the sound of something walking slowly across his bedroom ceiling. He moved out of that apartment within the month. The other 2 won't go camping anymore, not even in state parks close to the city. They say some things. Once they've marked you as something worth following, don't stop just because you've gone home. Story 5. Floor 13. The building has 12 floors. The elevator stopped on a 13th. Devin worked late at his office downtown, alone most nights, which never bothered him. Until the elevator stopped somewhere it shouldn't have. The building had 12 floors, no 13th, common in older high-rises, built with the same superstition in mind. That night, riding down from the 10th floor, the elevator jolted and the doors opened onto a floor lit by flickering fluorescent tubes, the number panel reading 13 in a dim orange glow. The hallway outside looked like his office floor, but wrong. Furniture from decades earlier, dust thick on every surface, and at the far end, a figure standing perfectly still, facing away from him. He didn't step out. He hit the door close button rapidly until it worked, and the elevator continued down as if nothing had happened. He reported it to building maintenance the next day. They checked the elevator logs. According to the system, the elevator had never stopped between floors 10 and the lobby. There was no 13th floor button. There never had been. Devin still works in that building. He takes the stairs now every single time, and he's noticed something small that he's never told anyone else. Sometimes waiting for the stairwell door to close behind him, he can hear the elevator chime on a floor that doesn't exist. Story 6. The seller. She sold it online for $20 because she wanted it out of her house. The buyer messaged her 3 days later asking her to take it back. Rachel found the porcelain doll in her late grandmother's attic and, having no attachment to it, listed it online for quick cash. A woman bought it and picked it up that same afternoon. 3 days later, the buyer messaged again, her tone completely different from the cheerful exchange before. She said the doll needed to go back. She said she'd wake up at 3 a.m. to find it moved from the shelf to sitting upright at the foot of her bed, facing her. Rachel almost laughed it off until the buyer sent a photo. The doll was positioned exactly the way Rachel's grandmother used to leave it, sitting upright, facing the bed, a specific habit Rachel had never mentioned to anyone, let alone a stranger online. Rachel took the doll back. That night, she left it in a box in the garage. In the morning, the box was in her bedroom, the doll sitting upright on her dresser, facing her bed. She never sold it again. She wrapped it in cloth, sealed it inside a container, and buried it at the edge of her grandmother's old property. She says that's the only thing that finally made the visit stop. But every so often, she says, she still feels like something is sitting at the foot of her bed at 3 a.m., even with nothing there at all.
Story 7. The Hitchhiker. He picked up a hitchhiker on a dead stretch of highway. 40 miles later, he realized she'd never once blinked. Tom drove long-haul routes through empty stretches of interstate, and picking up hitchhikers wasn't unusual out there where towns could be 60 miles apart. A woman flagged him down near mile marker 214, said she needed a ride to the next town. She sat quietly, staring straight ahead. Tom made small talk. She answered in short, flat responses, never turning her head. Around the 30-minute mark, he glanced over to ask a question and realized, with a creeping unease he couldn't explain, that he had never once seen her blink. Not once, the entire ride. He kept driving, telling himself it was nothing, until she suddenly said, without prompting, "You should stop the truck now." Her voice came out layered, like two voices speaking slightly out of sync. He didn't stop. He accelerated, and in his rearview mirror, he watched the passenger seat, empty, doors still closed, seatbelt hanging loose as though no one had ever been there. He called the police at the next town. They told him something he didn't want to hear. A woman had died at mile marker 214 nearly 10 years earlier, struck by a truck while trying to hitchhike home. Drivers on that stretch have reported picking her up ever since. Every one of them says the same thing. She never blinks, and she always tells them to stop the truck right before she disappears. Story 8. The Cabin. Search and rescue found the cabin exactly as the missing family left it. Except the calendar had been marked 3 weeks past the day they vanished. The Whitfield family rented a remote cabin for a weekend getaway and never checked out. When rangers finally located the property a week later, everything looked untouched. Dishes in the sink, beds unmade, luggage still packed in the corner. But the wall calendar had been crossed off day by day, in neat black marker, 3 weeks beyond the date the family was reported missing. Someone, or something, had been counting the days inside that cabin long after anyone should have been there to count them. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no forced entry. Just one detail rangers couldn't explain. Every mirror in the cabin had been turned to face the wall. The family was never found. To this day, hikers occasionally report the smell of wood smoke near that property, despite the cabin sitting cold and empty. And a few have described hearing, faintly through the trees, the sound of someone marking a calendar. A slow, deliberate scratch of pen against paper, counting days that no longer belong to anyone. Story 9. My Imaginary Friend. I had an imaginary friend when I was 6. My mother has a photograph of the two of us together, except she was the only one home that day. When I was 6, I had a friend named Eli, who I insisted lived in the space behind my closet. My parents assumed it was normal childhood imagination and didn't think much of it, until my mother found a photograph she'd taken of me that summer, sitting at the edge of my bed. In the photo, I'm laughing at something beside me. A small, blurred shape sitting close, like a child crouched at my level. My mother swears she was the only other person in the house that day. She has no idea who or what she photographed. Eli stopped visiting when I turned 7, and I mostly forgot about him. Until years later, going through old family boxes, I found a newspaper clipping my mother had kept about a boy who drowned in the lake behind our old neighborhood, decades before we ever moved in. His name was Elias. I haven't gone looking for that photograph since. But I know exactly where it is, in a box in my mother's attic. And some nights, I think about how certain I was, at 6 years old, that Eli was simply waiting for me to come back. Story 10. The Basement. They heard something moving in the basement for 2 years and assumed it was pipes. Then they found the tunnel. The Ortegas bought an older home with a partially finished basement and, like most homeowners, learned to live with its quirks, including a low, rhythmic knocking sound they heard almost nightly, which they chalked up to old plumbing settling. 2 years in, during a renovation, a contractor pulled up a section of subfloor and found a narrow tunnel beneath it, hand-dug, extending well past the property line, far beyond anything the original house plans accounted for. Inside, they found signs someone had lived down there. Blankets, food wrappers decades old, and messages scratched into the earthen walls dated across a span of nearly 15 years. The most recent one was dated only 6 months before the Ortegas moved in. Police investigated, but found no leads. No one knew who had dug the tunnel, how long they'd used it, or where they'd gone. The knocking stopped the week the tunnel was sealed with concrete. The Ortegas still live in the house. They say the knocking never came back. But sometimes, late at night, their dog sits at the edge of the basement stairs and stares down into the dark, refusing to go any closer, refusing to look away.